Welcome back to our series on learning SQLite and really just learning SQL in general by using the SQLite command line program, as well as a little bit in Python that we'll be doing later on as well. So far, we've covered a lot of stuff already, such as adding to a database, creating tables, removing rows, having specific select queries. We even talked about subqueries, all kinds of stuff. And today, what we'll be focusing on is dealing with NULL data, which, if you've done research before, you know how important this is. NULL data is everywhere. You're always going to come across it where you're missing data for some reason, and there's many ways you can go about it, but you first need to be able to find where your NULL data is. So without a doubt, let's get started. If you've kept up so far, this is what our current smokers table will look like. You can see here we have a couple columns, and we have a bunch of rows that we added. And we don't have any NULL data here yet, so we should first go ahead and add that. I just went ahead and added these are two rows that it's just null all the way across. Remember, null is a data type. And so these rows, each of the columns for this row is going to have just null data. Nothing's there. And I just wanted to add another row that actually has data, just so we're working with a table that has null data kind of in random places, which is kind of the real world scenario where you'll be given a large database and you might be having a lot of missing data in that database and you want to find it. We can also add another row that will have just only like one or two null columns, as you can see here. And then I also wanted to add another column, a brand new column, which if we remember from prior videos, we have to do the alter table command, add column, and the column name is going to be heart rate, and it expects the data type of integer. And if that all worked out, you'll be having this table now. So you can see we have these two null rows that we added. We have a row that has some null data, and then we have a column, heart rate, that all the data is null. So how do we go about actually we can see that there's null data, but what if we didn't have we didn't have a visual of the database and we needed to query it to figure out what the null data is? Because in the real world, your database is going to be much, much larger, and you're going to want to query and kind of filter out what is null and what's not. In order to do that, we're going to do select star. Remember, star, it means that we're selecting all the columns from our smokers table, where age, this is the name of the column, and then this new little query that we're adding or specifier, is that is null. So it's going to return to us all the columns for rows that have data where the age is null. And you can see here, we basically have the first column because it's all null. Second column, that was also all null. And then the other row that we added, that the age was null here. I guess I shouldn't have said column, but we have two rows that are all null. And then we have a row that has some data, but the age column is null. So it's going to show that for us. All right, what can we do from here? We want to first think about if we could delete null data and what null data we might want to actually delete. Now, looking here, or I guess looking at our full table, we want to first think about deleting the rows that have a age value of null. But if you can see here, we really, in all cases, we don't want to get rid of as much data if we don't have to. And here we have a date of birth. So what that means is that we can actually go ahead and later fill this in because we have the date of birth. So we want to just delete where both the age column and date of birth column is null. And we want to specify that because we really, in the data science world, we don't want to delete data if we don't have to, because all data can be used for good or bad. But so all we're doing there is deleting from the smokers table where the age column and the date of birth column is null for a row. And you'll see now we're left with this table. We don't have those ugly, completely null rows anymore, but we still have some null values that we want to take care of. Now, how might we go about actually adjusting where the data is null to fill in the age column when we have this date of birth column? How could we get SQL to kind of calculate that for us and fill it in? Well, first, we're going to be introducing this new cool stirf time function, essentially, in SQL. So our query or SQL statement is going to be to update the smokers table. And what we're going to be setting while we're updating is the age column. And we're going to update it to, you see here, it's stirf time. And what this is going to take, you can see here, we'll get into the details of it. The stirf time function is going to take two things. It's going to take what format it's that the year is going to be in, or I guess this is formatting for the year. It's just asking to pull out the year. And here, cool, we can say now, and SQL is going to know, okay, take the current time that's on your operating system or computer and pull the year out of it. So you can think of this as like, oh, it's going to pull out 2025 minus stirf time again, and we're using the year specifier, and as the second argument, DOB, which, look, it's not in quotes because it's actually a column in our table. Remember, we have the date of birth column, and so that's what that is specifying, is to pull the year, just the year, not the other like month and day, but just the year out. And so we're essentially doing 2025 minus 1999. And when we run that, we're going to see that it's going to give us 26. You can see here. And it gives us 26 because you might think, oh, it should give us 25. But we're just doing this based on the year. And so if you did 2025 minus 1999, it's going to be 26. And for the rest of the statement, it was just simply where patient ID equals 11 right here. But we also, look, because we haven't talked about primary keys yet and kind of like row specifiers so that they can be specific for each row, we have two different places where the patient ID is 11, which we'll discuss fixing that later and how to go about this kind of duplicate data stuff. But just for now, knowing that we have two where it's patient ID 11, we also want to add on that the age is null. So just specifically this column because it had used to have null data for the age column. And there's that. Now, another way that we can work with data is, let's say that we are dealing with our weight. We have our weight column, and we're just missing one piece of data, and we want to fill that in. Now, one thing that statisticians will do is often take the average or median and use that as the value for, like, to replace the null data. It's a common thing that you see in data science where you can actually, instead of leaving it null, your data ends up having more integrity when you're able to use an average or a median to fill it out. And so you essentially have more pieces of data and you kind of normalize it better. But aside from that, how do we actually do that in SQL? You would think at first, oh, update smokers and to set the weight column equal to the average of the weight column. But this line's not going to work. Why is that? It's because whenever you're using update is expecting a singular row, while when we use our average aggregate function, it's using multiple, essentially, rows in a single column to calculate the average. So that's not going to work. But we can get around that by using the subquery that we talked about in previous videos. And it's a pretty simple change. I mean, it looks very similar. It's just, you know how it's now in quote, or it's in parentheses. And this is our subquery. We're still doing update smokers, set weight. And then we have our subquery, which is to select the average weight. So now we're actually getting our average from the smokers table. And we're making sure just to take this average if the data is not null. Because if you think about it, it wouldn't make sense to, how do you calculate the null data as part of the average? We're not going to do that. So we're only going to take the average if there's data there. And we're going to be taking this value that it returns to us, the average, and we're going to be setting the value for the weight column where the data is null, if that makes sense. So we're essentially, okay, take the average of what we have and take that average and put it in the columns wherever it's null. And in this case, it's just one column. So it's going to fill in our column right here. You can see 72.13. It's going to take that and fill it in. So essentially, it took the average of the first group of columns and it filled in here. Now, what if we don't want that many decimal places? It doesn't make sense significant figures wise or just cleanliness wise to have so many decimal places. We could change our statement from earlier and specify it to be just rounded to one decimal place. And now we're not going to be able to we can't directly round, sadly, when we're in SQL. But what we can do is we can just go ahead and set that row, the row's data for the weight. Let's set it back to null. That's what's going on here. And then we run the same exact kind of query that we just did. And this time, all we're adding in is we're enclosing the average weight in this round function. And we're specifying that it's going to be to one decimal place right there. And so yeah, the query is just almost the same as earlier, except we just enclosed it in round. And you can see here, it's nicely only one decimal place. All right, now what if we want to actually drop null data? This is another common thing that you may end up doing is whenever you're like training models, and that is you only want to, let's say you have all the data in the world and it's okay that you have null data and you just want to ignore it for some of your calculations or whatever you're grabbing to show. What we're going to do for that is I'm first going to just fill in the heart rate column. That's what's happening here is I'm filling in all the values as 72 for the heart rate. And from there, I want to also make a couple of these data pieces null so that we can have some null data to work with. And to do that, it's just some of the stuff we talked about in video 1 and 2, changing the rows. So it's basically taking the rows where it's null, or taking the rows patient ID equals 4, the row where patient ID equals 6, the row where patient ID equals 9, and the rows, plural, because remember we have 2 rows with patient ID equals 11 that we're going to talk about kind of fixing later on. And we're just going to set that to null. And so you can see here is now instead of having all 72s, we have a couple rows that are null. And then we can go ahead and just select star, select all the rows, and select all the columns where the heart rate is not null. And you can see here beautifully, it removed those null rows, the rows that had null data for heart rate, and is just showing us the rows where there is data for the heart rate and where it's not null. This wraps up this video. This was a much faster video, but I thought it was important to really single out working with null data and how important that is into a single video. But in the next videos, we're going to really get into the stuff that people don't necessarily like, but you'll come to like it. And it has to do with constraints, setting cases, and then finally relating data and join. That's where we get to the good stuff, such as with primary keys and working with how we had that column, or how we had 2 rows that had identical, essentially, keys. We don't want that. And we'll get into some of this other stuff in later videos, so I hope you stick around.